She was just a 13-year-old girl eating a soggy sandwich under the rain, alone, forgotten, and convinced nobody cared. But when a millionaire stopped to ask why, what he learned would tear his entire world apart. The rain had been falling for hours, cold, relentless, the kind that soaks you to the bone before you even realize it. And yet, there she was. A 13-year-old black girl sat alone on a splintered bus stop bench, knees tucked tight to her chest, a crumpled brown paper bag on her lap. Her clothes clung to her like wet paper, sneakers caked with mud. With each passing car, dirty water splashed inches from her feet. But she didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just ate. Her name was Aaliyah Monroe. The sandwich inside the bag was flattened and soggy, bread dissolving under the rain that leaked through the paper. She tore small bites from it with trembling fingers, chewing slowly, not for taste but because it was all she had. Across the street, inside a high-end cafe with wide windows and warm lights, a man in a tailored charcoal suit stared at her. Jonathan Whitaker, 54, multi-millionaire, CEO of a logistics firm with offices across 3 states. He had just signed a deal worth 8 figures and was halfway through a steak dinner. But he couldn't stop watching the girl outside. "Sir, would you like another refill?" the waitress asked. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the bus stop, on the child who hadn't even noticed the rain pouring off the edge of the shelter and onto her shoulders. Then he saw it, the way she hesitated before every bite, glancing down the street as if she were waiting for someone who would never come. The way her gaze lingered on the families laughing inside the cafe windows, and the way she quietly placed half of her sandwich back into the bag, to save for later. It wasn't pity he felt. It was something sharper. Guilt, maybe, or a memory clawing its way back from a past he'd spent decades trying to forget. Jonathan pushed his chair back. "Check, please," he muttered, not waiting for the bill before stepping into the storm. "Hey there," he said gently, stopping a few feet away. "You okay?" Aaliyah looked up, startled. Her dark eyes met his, wary, guarded. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I'm just waiting." "For what?" She paused, hugging the paper bag tighter. "For someone who probably forgot about me." That line hit Jonathan harder than the rain ever could. And it was in that moment, drenched on a street corner beside a child he'd never met, that he knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. But this was only the beginning. Because when Jonathan learned the real reason Aaliyah was eating alone in the rain, it would tear apart everything he thought he knew about himself, and the family he thought he had. What secret could a child carry that would shatter a millionaire's world in a single sentence? The sun had barely risen when Aaliyah Monroe slipped out the front door of the 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her adoptive parents. The place always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and pine cleaner, a cheap attempt to cover the damp creeping through the old walls. She zipped up her faded pink backpack and started the walk to Carver Middle School, head down, hood up. Another day. Just keep your head down. Aaliyah wasn't like the other kids. She didn't wear the newest sneakers. She didn't talk much in class. And she definitely didn't have the kind of family people showed off on Parent Day. But she carried herself with quiet resilience, a strength that had been forged long before she even knew what the word meant. Adopted at age 7 after spending most of her childhood bouncing between foster homes, Aaliyah had learned 2 things: how to survive and how to stay invisible. Her adoptive parents, Grace and Daniel Whitaker, lived in a neighborhood where invisible was exactly what they preferred her to be. Grace, 48, a former corporate PR executive, had once dreamed of being the picture-perfect mom. Daniel, 51, ran a small contracting business and cared more about appearances than affection. They'd adopted Aaliyah after a long, expensive struggle with infertility, and though they'd never say it out loud, the truth hung heavy in the air. They wanted a daughter. Just not me. At home, the words, grateful, and lucky were thrown around like confetti, a reminder that Aaliyah should always remember what they had done for her. But warmth, hugs, "I'm proud of you," those were luxuries reserved for someone else. Microaggressions in plain sight. At school, Aaliyah's days were filled with small, cutting moments, the kind that never make headlines but leave scars all the same. "Is that your real mom?" one girl asked at lunch, staring at a photo of Grace, tall, pale, and blonde, taped inside Aaliyah's binder. "Yeah," Aaliyah said quietly. "She is." "Wow, that's so noble of her." In history class, when the topic of slavery came up, the teacher's eyes always flicked toward her as if she were the spokesperson for an entire people. And on the school bus, when a white boy imitated her hair with a mop and called her poodle girl, the driver looked straight ahead. Don't react. If you react, they win. But the hardest moments weren't at school. They were at home, where silence could cut deeper than words. The house that wasn't a home. "Dinner's on the stove," Grace would say, sliding her plate onto the marble counter and disappearing upstairs without asking how Aaliyah's day went. "Homework better be done," Daniel would grumble, glancing up from his tablet without ever really seeing her. They weren't cruel, they weren't abusive, but they were distant, polite strangers sharing a roof, and Aaliyah, for all her quiet obedience, never quite felt like she belonged to them, or anywhere. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm just not enough. Yet she clung to hope. Every night before bed, she whispered the same wish into the dark. "Please let them love me tomorrow." Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan Whitaker, Daniel A.'s older brother, lived a life so far removed from Aaliyah's reality, it might as well have been another universe. Jonathan had built his logistics empire from scratch, turning a single delivery truck into a multi-state operation. His mansion sat behind iron gates, his name appeared on philanthropy boards, and his company sponsored scholarships across the South. He was a man praised for his generosity, but privately, he was haunted by the collapse of his marriage and the estrangement from his own daughter. What he didn't know was that blood still connected him to the small, forgotten girl quietly suffering in his brother's home, and that their worlds were about to collide. One Tuesday afternoon, during a rare family dinner, Grace scrolled through her phone while Daniel argued about a business invoice. Aaliyah sat silently at the table, pushing cold green beans around her plate. "Dad," she said softly, "there's a field trip to the Civil Rights Museum next week. It's $20. Can I—" Daniel didn't look up. "We'll see. But the permission slip is due tomorrow." "I said we'll see." Inner thought, "Of course. Why did I even ask?" That night, she found herself counting the coins in an old mason jar she kept hidden under her bed, money she de-saved from recycling cans and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Small victories, harsh reminders. The next morning, Aaliyah stood in the lunch line with her carefully counted coins clutched in her fist. The cafeteria smelled of reheated pizza and bleach, and her stomach growled. When she reached the front, the cashier glanced at the change and sighed. "You're short," she said flatly. I think it's enough," Aaliyah murmured. "It's not. Next." A hush fell over the line. Snickers. Someone whispered, "Guess charity doesn't pay well." Aaliyah's face burned. She stepped aside, hunger gnawing at her ribs. But then a teacher, Ms. Porter, her history teacher, placed a tray in front of her. "Eat," she said gently. "No one should go hungry." But the kindness of strangers wouldn't always be there, and soon Aaliyah would have to face something far more painful than an empty stomach. The seed of a secret. That weekend, while Grace and Daniel hosted friends in the backyard, laughing loudly, glasses clinking, Aaliyah stayed upstairs, curled under a blanket with an empty stomach. She'd overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear, Grace's voice, hushed but clear. "We did our part. It's not like she's really ours. Not really ours, not really theirs, not really anyone's." It was the first time she truly believed it, that no matter how hard she tried, she might never be more than a guest in their lives. But someone else was about to enter that story. Someone who would see her not as a burden, but as a mirror of a past he'd spent years trying to erase. And when their paths crossed, everything would change. The apartment was silent, except for the steady hiss of rain outside and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Aaliyah sat on the edge of her bed, a battered notebook open on her lap. On the page, in neat, careful handwriting, she had written 3 words: "Find real family. If they don't want me, maybe someone else does." It wasn't a plan, not really. More like a dream. But it was the first time she'd dared to think it out loud, even on paper. The words scared her, and yet they felt like oxygen. The turning point had come earlier that afternoon. At lunch, while she ate alone at the far end of the cafeteria, Tiana Brooks, a classmate known for being unapologetically outspoken, slid into the seat across from her. "Why you always by yourself, Monroe?" Tiana asked, tearing open a bag of chips. "You hiding from the world? Or just allergic to people?" Aaliyah smiled weakly. "Guess I'm not really good company." Tiana studied her. "Nah, people just don't know what they're missing." Then, with that blunt, fearless tone she was known for, she added, "You ever think about telling somebody what's going on at home?" Aaliyah stiffened. "Nothing's going on." "Girl, please. You show up hungry, wearing the same shoes from last year, and you flinch every time someone mentions parents. Something's going on." "If I tell her, will she think I'm broken too?" "I'm fine," Aaliyah said, but even she didn't believe it. Tiana shrugged. "Fine, but if you ever need backup, I got you." It was the first time anyone had said those words to her. "I got you." They stuck to her ribs like a hot meal. And that night, staring at those 3 words in her notebook, Aaliyah felt something dangerous begin to grow. Hope. That hope turned into resolve when she overheard another conversation. This one not meant for her ears. Daniel's voice drifted down the hall. "I told you, Grace, we're not paying for her dance program. It's a waste of money." "She's talented, Daniel. The teacher said she could get a scholarship." "Scholarship? Please. Those programs are for real dancers. We're not throwing away money on a pity project." The words sliced deep. She'd never asked for much. Just a chance to do something she loved. But to them, even her dreams were disposable. That night, she tore out a fresh page in her notebook. This time, she started writing something bigger, a step-by-step plan. Save money. Find out where I came from. Contact someone, anyone, who might care. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever had before. But as Aaliyah began taking her first steps toward independence, she had no idea that someone else was already watching, and quietly digging into the very secrets she was trying to uncover. Across town, Jonathan Whitaker sat in his study, staring at a grainy photo he'd snapped through the rain-streaked window of that cafe weeks earlier. Aaliyah, soaked and shivering under the bus shelter. He couldn't explain why he'd taken the picture. Something about that moment had burned itself into his mind. Maybe it was her quiet strength. Maybe it was the way her eyes reminded him of someone he used to know. He opened his laptop and began typing, "Aaliyah Monroe Birmingham Adoption Records." What he found made his pulse quicken. There she was, age 7, ward of the state, adopted by Daniel and Grace Whitaker, his brother. Why didn't they tell me? Why hide her? Jonathan picked up the phone. "Daniel," he said when his brother answered, "we need to talk." "Now's not a good time. It's about the girl." Silence, then coldly, "She's fine." "I saw her, Dan. In the rain, alone, eating out of a paper bag." That's none of your business. It is now. The line went dead. Jonathan stared at the phone, a knot forming in his chest. If his brother wouldn't give him answers, he'd find them himself. Meanwhile, Aaliyah had begun her own quiet mission. After school, she started staying late, cleaning classrooms and emptying trash bins. The janitor, Mr. Coleman, slipped her a few dollars under the table for the help. On weekends, she walked neighborhood dogs and collected recyclables. It wasn't too much, just coins and crumpled bills. But every cent brought her closer to her goal. At the library, she used the public computers to search for information, adoption records, DNA test kits, even support groups for former foster kids. Most of it was confusing. Some of it was heartbreaking. But it was hers, her story, her fight. She began talking more with Tiana, too. They spent afternoons at the park bench across from the library, plotting and dreaming. "What's the first thing you'd do if you found them?" Tiana asked one day. Aaliyah thought for a long moment. "I'd ask them why. Why they gave you up. Yeah. And why nobody ever wanted me back. Maybe the answer will hurt. But maybe it'll set me free." What Aaliyah didn't know was that someone had already begun searching for her. And the truth they were about to uncover would be far more complicated than she could ever imagine. Jonathan's search led him to an old social worker, Marianne Holt, who had handled Aaliyah's case years ago. "She was a bright kid," Marianne said, flipping through the dusty file. "Hard start. Parents died when she was 5. No known relatives. Adoption took longer than usual because what?" Marianne hesitated. "Because there were questions about the circumstances of her parents' deaths." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Let's just say there were people who didn't want the details public, and one name kept showing up in the paperwork." She slid a photocopy across the desk. "Daniel Whitaker. What did my brother do?" Back at home, tension was building. Aaliyah's growing independence hadn't gone unnoticed. "Where are you getting money?" Grace demanded one night, arms crossed in the doorway. "I've been helping Mr. Coleman after school." "You don't need to be working. We provide for you." "You said we couldn't afford the dance program. I thought—" "Don't talk back," Grace snapped, "and stop sneaking around like some stray. It's embarrassing." The words landed like a slap. Stray. That's how they saw her. She retreated to her room, biting back tears. On her desk, the notebook lay open. Next to "find real family," she added a fourth line. "Leave." She was closer than ever to walking away for good, but before she could, one revelation would shake everything she thought she knew about where she came from. A week later, while helping Mr. Coleman clean out an old storage room, Aaliyah stumbled upon a box labeled "Personal Effects, 2015. Inside was a manila envelope with her name on it. She opened it slowly. Inside were photographs she had never seen. A smiling couple, a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, a family picnic. On the back of one photo, in faded ink, was a name. Whitaker. Her heart pounded. Whitaker. The same name as them. Inner thought. What if they're not just my adoptive family? What if they're my blood? She stuffed the photos into her backpack and ran all the way home. Jonathan's investigation was also coming to a head. He'd confirmed that Daniel had known Aaliyah's parents, that there had been a business dispute, a lawsuit, and then the suspicious accident. None of it was proof, but it was enough to convince him that Aaliyah deserved the truth. He contacted Marianne again. "I want to meet her," he said. "She's still a minor. I don't care. She needs to know." The following week, everything began to unravel. Grace found the photos in Aaliyah's backpack. "What is this?" she demanded, voice trembling with fury. "They were in a box at school," Aaliyah said. "They have your last name. What aren't you telling me? You're not entitled to every detail of our lives." "It's my life, too," she shouted, the first time she had ever raised her voice in that house. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Enough. Go to your room." "No," Aaliyah said, standing her ground. I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me the truth." The room went silent. Grace's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Some things," he said finally, "are better left buried." But the truth wasn't buried, not anymore. And by the time Aaliyah learned the full story, it would explode everything the Whitakers had built, including their carefully guarded lies. Birmingham, Saturday, 3:12 p.m. Low thunder rumble, footsteps splashing in puddles, urgent knocking on a door. The storm had rolled in early, dark clouds bruising the sky, wind whipping leaves down empty streets. Inside the Whitaker house, the tension was heavier than the weather outside. Aaliyah stood in the living room, clutching the faded photographs in her trembling hands. Grace paced by the window. Daniel hovered near the doorway, jaw clenched, his silence louder than any confession. "Tell me the truth," Aaliyah said again, voice breaking. "Were my parents... were they killed?" Daniel's eyes darted to Grace. "Drop it, Aaliyah." "No," she shouted. "You knew them, didn't you? They had the same name. What are you hiding from me?" Before he could answer, a knock thundered through the house. Grace froze. Daniel swore under his breath and moved toward the door. When it swung open, a tall man in a soaked trench coat stood on the porch, his eyes locked on Aaliyah. Jonathan Whitaker. "What are you doing here?" Daniel hissed. "Finishing what you should have done a long time ago." Jonathan stepped inside, dripping rain onto the hardwood floor. "Telling her the truth." Aaliyah stared at him, heart pounding. "You know about my parents?" Jonathan nodded. "I knew them. They were good people, and they died in a car accident 10 years ago. A crash that happened just weeks after they filed a lawsuit against Daniel." The room went silent. Daniel's face turned ashen. "You're lying," Grace whispered. "No," Jonathan said, voice low and steady. "The investigation was inconclusive, but there were questions about the brakes, about the payments made to a mechanic, about the settlement Daniel received afterward." Aaliyah's breath hitched. What does that mean?" "It means," Jonathan said, stepping closer, "that your parents might not have just died, and that the man who adopted you may have had something to gain from their deaths." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You have no proof." "Maybe not yet," Jonathan shot back, "but I've already spoken to a lawyer, and the case can be reopened." The room exploded in chaos. Grace sobbing, Daniel shouting, and Aaliyah standing motionless in the center of it all, until Jonathan said the words that silenced everyone. "You deserve to know one more thing," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "Your mother was my sister." The words sliced through the storm like lightning. Aaliyah staggered backward, the photographs falling from her hands. "His sister? That means—" I'm your uncle," Jonathan whispered. "I didn't know where you were. I thought you'd been placed with another family, but when I saw you that day, alone, in the rain, I knew you were her." Tears streamed down Aaliyah's face. Everything, the loneliness, the rejection, the unanswered questions, crashed over her at once. "You knew," she said, turning to Daniel, her voice trembling with rage. "You knew who I was, and you lied to me." Daniel's face twisted. "We did what was best for you." "No," Jonathan cut in. "You did what was best for you. You took her to silence the truth." 4 seconds of heavy silence, Aaliyah wiped her tears. "I want to leave," she said quietly. "You're not going anywhere," Daniel barked, stepping forward. Jonathan moved between them. "Touch her, and you'll answer to me, and the law." The threat hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and for the first time in her life, Aaliyah didn't feel small. She didn't feel powerless. She felt seen. Sirens wailing in the distance, rain pounding harder on the roof. The sound grew louder, closer, until red and blue lights splashed against the walls of the house. Grace gasped. Daniel turned pale. Jonathan placed a gentle hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. "It's time for this to end." And as the police knocked on the door, the truth that had been buried for a decade finally clawed its way into the light. Birmingham. 6 months later. The rain that once soaked Aaliyah Monroe as she ate alone beneath a bus stop now fell gently outside a new home, a place filled with warmth, laughter, and stories that belonged to her. She had grown taller, more confident. Her hair, once hidden beneath hoodies, now framed her face proudly, and every night before bed she still whispered a wish. But this time, it wasn't for love or belonging. It was for courage. To never let anyone else feel as invisible as she once did. Maybe pain is where strength begins. Aaliyah's story isn't just about one girl. It's about all the moments we look away, from the quiet child in the cafeteria, the foster kid with the forced smile, the teenager walking home alone in the rain, because it's easier not to get involved. It's about how systemic neglect, prejudice, and silence can cut just as deep as overt cruelty, and how the people we trust most can become the ones who betray us, when their comfort matters more than our truth. But it is also a story about what happens when one person, even a stranger, chooses to see. Jonathan didn't save Aaliyah with money. He saved her by showing up, by listening, by believing that her story mattered, even when no one else did. And in doing so, he reminded us that justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's simply telling the truth out loud. Racism and neglect don't always wear hateful faces. Sometimes they hide behind politeness, policies, or good intentions. They thrive in silence, and they only end when someone has the courage to break that silence. So ask yourself, what if this was your neighborhood, your school, your family? Would you walk past the child in the rain, or would you stop to ask why she's sitting there in the first place? Because sometimes the difference between despair and destiny is simply someone deciding to care. If you were in Aaliyah's place, what would you do? Share your thoughts below. And remember, your voice might be the one that helps someone else feel seen. Birmingham, 1 week later. The headlines hit the morning news like a thunderclap. Whitaker family under investigation in 2015 wrongful death case. Adoptive father accused of withholding information about child's parents. And in every photo beneath those bold letters, one image repeated. Aaliyah Monroe, walking hand in hand with Jonathan Whitaker, her chin a little higher, her eyes a little brighter. The investigation moved quickly. Daniel was placed under formal inquiry for financial fraud and potential obstruction of justice. Grace, shaken and tearful, cooperated with authorities, admitting that she had known about the lawsuit and the potential connection, but had chosen silence over scandal. Gavel bang, murmurs fading to silence in a courtroom. The court ordered that Aaliyah be removed from the Whitaker household immediately, citing emotional neglect and willful deception. It wasn't the dramatic takedown you see in movies, no handcuffs, no shouting, but it was justice, slow, inevitable, necessary. They said I wasn't theirs, and now they never will be. Jonathan's petition for guardianship moved swiftly through the courts. His wealth, influence, and, more importantly, his genuine love for Aaliyah made the decision nearly unanimous. For the first time in years, the young girl had a room of her own, a bed that didn't feel borrowed, and meals that weren't earned by silence. But more than any of that, she had answers. "I should have been there," Jonathan told her one evening as they watched the rain from his balcony. "I failed you once. I won't do it again." "You didn't fail me," Aaliyah replied softly. "You found me, and you told me the truth. That's more than anyone else ever did." The two sat in silence for a while, watching the storm pass. And for Aaliyah, the rain no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a cleansing, washing away years of lies, leaving behind only what was real. The community rallied around her story. Teachers spoke out about the signs they'd missed. Advocacy groups highlighted the case as a textbook example of systemic neglect and racial bias in the adoption system. Scholarships poured in. News crews called her a symbol of resilience. But to Aaliyah, she wasn't a symbol. She was just a girl who finally knew who she was and where she came from. They tried to bury the truth, but I am the proof it survived. Justice hadn't erased the past, but it had given her a future, and for the first time, that future felt like it belonged to her.